And I remember one day sitting at my desk thinking, is this what I learned? Is this what all my Islamic studies and my study was all about, just to make the non-Muslims more wealthy? First, I did my own Islamic Will, then I came across this seminar, and then I thought, well, actually, there's a market there. And the rest is history. I left the firm, and a few years later, I set up iWill Solicitors. And surprisingly, it surprised myself, to this day, it's going from strength to strength.
Assalamu alaikum, Haroon.
Walaikum salam.
My brother Jazakallah for joining us on this podcast. On the Islamic Finance Podcast series, we predominantly focus on different aspects of Islamic finance, especially aspects of property. But something that's actually critically important, we don't really think about, is our will, and from an Islamic point of view as well. So what's the importance and significance of what is even an Islamic will compared to a traditional will?
Yeah, it's quite interesting you say that, because a lot of people focus on building their money throughout their wealth from a young age. When I grow up, I want this and I want that. And then they get into a work-life structure, and it's all about building and spending and making. But in terms of preserving and succession planning, it doesn't really feature. And that's where the Islamic will kicks in. And in the first instance, what is a will? A will is a document which allows you to distribute your property and affairs after you die in accordance with your wishes. So you have two options, really. You either have your own wishes or what the government provides, which is called intestacy. The Islamic will is a little bit different in that it's a will which accords with your faith as well, with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires you to do, in accordance with largely the verse in Surah Nisa. So it's a specific distribution. English law allows full testamentary freedom, means do what you want. And I've had one client who left everything to Jack and Jill. So when I asked who are Jack and Jill, because they didn't have children, they said they are our cats.
Right.
Yeah. And when we say everything, we're looking at a few £100,000. So everything to each other and then to Jack and Jill.
Yes.
So English law allows you to do that. You can leave it to the cat's home. You can leave it to your next door neighbor. You can leave it to your favored son. Whereas the Sharia has a prescribed distribution for at least 2/3 of your estate.
Okay.
So there's an element of forced heirship. 2/3 must pass to certain inheritors, but there's an element of freedom where 1/3 can pass elsewhere. So an Islamic will is an English will. It must be an English will, otherwise it wouldn't be valid under English law.
Yes.
But it provides for distribution in accordance with the Sharia.
And just elaborate on the distributions, what they should be.
Right. So how long do you have? But it depends on the family and how
Yes.
you're survived by. But as a general rule, spouses get either a half or a quarter. So if I pass away leaving a wife, if I have children, then she'll get an eighth. But if I have no children, she'll get a quarter. If my wife dies without leaving children, then I will get a half. And if she has children, I'll get a quarter. So usually the spouse's share is, for male, half or a quarter; for women, a quarter or an eighth. And for parents, it's usually a sixth share of the inheritance each. And for children, it's the balance, usually in a 2-to-1 portion. This is, interestingly, I can't give you the verses in Arabic, but this is interestingly the verses in Surah Nisa. It effectively specifies ayahs number 9 and 10, I believe.
Yes.
The who gets what share. So Allah directly says, regards to children's inheritance, to the male portion equal to that of 2 females, etc.
And you're probably the first person in the country that professionally started putting together Islamic wills probably about 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
So what was your background? How did you end up in this space doing this?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I didn't ever want to practice in wills and probate, but decided to. I qualified in it and I enjoyed it. So I was enjoying it. Joined a firm, city firm in Birmingham, well-known firm, top 100 firm, and I was making the wealthy more wealthy. And I was sitting there, I'd been working there for 2 or 3 years, and I remember one day sitting at my desk thinking, is this what I learned? Is this what all my Islamic studies and my study was all about, just to make the non-Muslims more wealthy? And then I kind of didn't think anything of it. But then a few days later, I came across a seminar about Islamic wills. And the people who were organizing it were trying to find lawyers to do Islamic wills, because no one was doing Islamic wills. Then I looked into it, and on the back of that, I wrote my own Islamic will. And then, first I did my own Islamic will, then I came across this seminar, and then I thought, well, actually, there's a market there. And the rest is history. I left the firm, and a few years later, I set up iWill Solicitors. And surprisingly, it surprised myself, to this day, it's going from strength to strength.
Yes. And who is it that typically would approach you to put together a will like this? Well, actually, just before you answer that question, off camera, we were talking about probably 90% of Muslims would in this country would probably pass away without leaving a will.
Yeah. So
Which is shocking.
again, off camera, I checked the statistics for the wider community, and the wider community is roughly about half the people die without writing a will.
Okay.
But in the Muslim community, it's much more than that. Probably 90 to 95% of people die without writing a will. And I challenge you, I've done presentations up and down the country, 100 people there, how many of you have wills? And you get one or two hands get raised at most.
Yes.
So there's not many at all. It is increasing. So I'd say 10, 15 years ago, it's less than 5%. Now it's possibly at 5% level, but it's not many.
And who is it typically that would come to you to get an Islamic will put together?
Yeah, so one of the challenges we've had over the years is just education. And shows like this help in increasing the education and awareness. People need to know that they should write a will and the benefits of writing a will and the pitfalls of not writing a will. I used to actually train lawyers for central law training on Islamic wills. And I remember one of the delegates there said, a lawyer said, like, why is it Muslims aren't writing wills? And it got me thinking. And the answer at the time, 20 years ago, was when we've not been dying in England. We're a new community, first generation. Either we died without wealth, in which case it wasn't an issue, or we weren't dying because we're in our 60s, 70s. But now many of us will have our parents in our 80s, 90s. Many of us would have lost their parents. And that drives home the subject. And our parents have wealth. Our community now has a lot of wealth. So that's kind of forced the topic. And then on top of that, there's an Islamic awareness. 25 years ago, there was no Islamic finance in this country. There's no such thing as murabaha and commodity murabaha and ijara and the financial terms that are relatively common now. And Islamic wills just weren't available. I looked up and down the country. There was no one offering an Islamic will service. You'd get a pamphlet prepared by a Mulana, but he has no knowledge of the English law, so it wouldn't work as a will. So with the increase in awareness from the Sharia side, the importance of a will, and the increasing financial capacity of Muslims and the mortality of Muslims, that combination has caused a rise in the amount of people writing wills.
Because I guess it's not uncommon in the community, in the wider Muslim community, to see lots of sibling rivalry over assets once parents passed away, and how that should be dealt with, and feuds that go on for many, many years, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that where there's money, there is usually a problem as well. But it's more unfortunate when it comes to your own family. So father's worked hard all his life and leaves his wealth to his children, and then they're squabbling it, and sometimes spending hundreds of thousands on legal fees trying to dispute and resolve father's hard-earned wealth. Again, when I did a presentation to my old firm, when I went back to the old firm, I did a presentation to them on Islamic wills. And one of the partners, non-Muslim partner there, who heard the presentation, said, "This is amazing. This takes all the discretion away from you. You're effectively doing what your creator tells you as far as your wealth is concerned."
Yes.
He said, "Do people do that?" And I said, "Yes, Muslims do that." So the advantage, and touching upon from what you've said, is a lot of the disputes are due to a sense of entitlement. I deserve more, or a lack of a will being prepared, an equal split by default. Whereas if the parent has written a will and it says who gets what, then it makes it a lot more clear. You can take into account lifetime gifts. You can take into account people's circumstances. One child may be much more wealthy than the other. Islamically, the share is still fixed, but you can give guidance and the like and make provisions for that. It's all to do with planning. And will planning, we call it. We don't call it prepare your will. So engage in a will planning exercise. And if you plan for something, then you're more prepared for it. Whereas if you don't, you can end up in a problem.
Yes. So in that situation where there is no will, which unfortunately seems to be in the vast majority of cases, what typically happens in that situation under English law?
What typically happens is that the daughters become experts of English law and the sons become experts of Sharia, because what happens is English law has a set rules called intestacy. And usually, not all, and it's a big misnomer, not all of the wealth passes to the spouse. So if I'm worth £1.3 million, for example, as a rough example, without a will, 300,000, I think it's about 322,000, was just recently changed, passes to my spouse, and the remaining 1 million is split between spouse and children equally. So approximately 822 to wife, 500 to kids.
Yes.
And the kids get it equally. Now, nobody has ever come into my office and said they want to split it in that way. It's just completely arbitrary. And if I was only worth 300,000 and I passed away, my wife would get everything. And if she remarries the next day, then her new husband may get everything and my kids see nothing. So it's complete unfairness. So that's the position without a will. There's a set criteria, which is laid out in the intestacy rules, and that's followed accordingly. Practically, if you have adult children, then they can redirect the share, and spouse, they can agree to have an Islamic distribution, but more often than not, they won't, because some will benefit and they'll take it on the chin and say, well, that's what was intended. And those who are losing out will then try to appeal to their siblings or to their parent or whoever it may be for their share.
Yes. And I guess this part of this is managing the distribution of finances, but there's also tax implications in how this is set up as well and how well thought through it is.
Yeah, so the intestacy provisions aren't tax efficient. So the example I gave of 1.3 million, there's no tax to pay. But if I'm worth 2.3 million, then the children's share is 1 million, but that's all subject to tax. And the tax is at 40% minus allowances of potentially 500,000. So the tax bill could be well in the hundreds of thousands. We had one recently, a matter where a person passed away, had a £4 million estate, left a spouse and 2 children. Because the children were under 18, we had to apply to court, very expensive Variation of Trust Act application, to have a will in place which was tax efficient, which you're allowed to do within 2 years of death. But you're spending tens of thousands of pounds to get a will in place, which ordinarily wouldn't cost anywhere near that amount, because it needed a court application, and the courts don't like to discriminate between sons and daughters. They're going to want an equal split. They find no justification for it. So there's a tax angle to not having a will, and the tax rate, inheritance tax rate, is at 40%. So it can be some serious money. And there's just a distribution angle, the fairness between sons and daughters. When I say that daughters become experts at English law, is because the intestacy provisions provide for an equal split. So the daughters will say, Dad died without a will. He knew what that meant. He wanted us to get equally. And the sons will say, oh, we've been to the mosque once and we heard the Mulana say, sons should get twice share of daughters, so we want our double share. And that causes a rift.
Yes.
One way or another.
Yes. And when it comes to planning out the will, there can be trusts that can be set up as well as beneficiaries. So how would that work?
Yeah, so trusts are very important. People misunderstand trusts and think that they're complicated, but in reality...
Maybe give us an overview of what trust is first.
Yeah. So in reality, if I gave you my phone and said, look after this, you are now holding that phone on trust for me. So the way we prepare many of our wills is we require that the estate, everything I left behind, my house, for example, falls into trust for it to be managed by trustees for the benefit of my inheritors. So for example, if I have a wife and 4 children, or let's just say I have 4 children and I pass away, well, if they are each entitled to £250,000 each, I've died worth £1 million, it may be that one's going through a divorce, the other's going through business problems, the other's on a drug dependency, Allah forbid, and the other's very wealthy.
Yes.
In all 4 scenarios, there's a problem with them receiving the wealth. The one going through the divorce, their spouse will say, we'll have some of that. This is the day we were waiting for. The one going through business problems, the creditors will be after him. The one who's very wealthy, he will cause him a tax problem by making him more wealthy. The one on drugs will just, he'll think it's happy days. Yes. The wealth was wasted. And you can even have a situation where you've got a disabled beneficiary or beneficiary on benefits. The entitlement to benefits will stop. Whereas if the £1 million went into trust, then the trustees at that time could consider the children's circumstances, and the child who's going for a divorce can say to him, look, finalise the divorce, then we'll give you your share.
Yeah.
And the child who's on drugs, they can get him treatment, and the child who's wealthy, they could bypass that child in favour of his own children. So there's lots of mechanisms of benefits of having the trust as well as tax benefits.
Yes, and the person left responsible to deal with the affairs, the executor. So how is that appointed, and what's the significance of that person's role?
Yeah, very important. We usually recommend more than one person, because if you appoint one, that temptation to be a little bit generous with the inheritance or miserly with the inheritance, or to tuck into the inheritance may seek in. So we usually recommend you appoint 2 or 3 people to be your executors and trustees. But if you don't have a will, going back to the intestacy, another downside to intestacy, you can't control who's going to manage your affairs. It's a criteria which is determined by the law. Whereas if you have a will, you can appoint your trusted friend, your solicitor, your accountant, your son, your daughter, whoever you feel is appropriate, your spouse. And the role of the executing trustee is quite significant. They are responsible for your affairs. They stand in your shoes. So they will decide who gets what. Do we sell the house? Do we keep the house? So it's quite a significant role. And interestingly, a lot of things we're mentioning, I've learned during my career as a lawyer. But if I'd studied the Sharia, I would have learned a lot more in a much quicker space of time. And one of the ayahs in Surah An-Nisa says, let those who are disposing of an estate have the same fear in their mind as if they'd left their own helpless family behind. Let them fear Allah and speak words of appropriate comfort. So that's the executor and trustee. Mm-hmm. You're in that position to be disposing of an estate, have the same fears you would have if it was your own wealth.
Yeah.
And I've seen it so many times where executors and trustees haven't done their responsibility, haven't kept their responsibility well, and the assets have either through neglect being wasted. For example, there's one case where they've just not done anything for several years. Someone's passed away, they're the executor and trustee, they'll get round to it, but several years later, they've lost the opportunity to claim tax allowances, they've lost the opportunity to leave to charity and get additional tax allowances. The property's gone to waste, there's a dispute over the property. So the executing trustee has quite a critical role.
Yes. And the executors, they can be beneficiaries as well?
Yes, they can be. Yeah. And again, we can only advise, and everyone knows their circumstances better than we do. So what I mean by that is it appropriate for you to appoint your children as executors and trustees? Well, they may be great children, they may be God-fearing, they may be commercially aware, they may be ideal, and they may have a happy family situation, which I'm still yet to come across properly. Yeah. Or it may be that someone in an identical situation but has children who are not getting on as well. So in one case, it may be appropriate for the children. In the other case, it may not be.
Could also be conflicts of interest in that situation as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes we say that, look, do you actually want to be an executor and trustee? Because that responsibility of dealing with an estate is quite high. And therefore, you should only put yourself forward, and it's not for you to put yourself forward, but you should only want that position if you feel that you are in a position to do it justice. Otherwise, it's a responsibility you're getting, and you can only fail in it in some respects.
Often the perception is you need a large amount of money to be able to get involved in property. Although that can be the case, it doesn't necessarily have to be. There are many, many different ways that you can make money from property. The biggest challenge is, though, that many of them can't be done in a Sharia compliant way. There are, however, still some strategies and techniques that can be used to make significant profits from property. I've put together a short training for you that explains how you can make money from property in a halal and Sharia compliant way. Head over to the link, which is sajhussain.com/halal, and you can get the free training there. Now let's jump back to the podcast. You touched on charity earlier on. So how can charity be set up in the will, in the will planning?
So again, charity, I think, for Islamic wills especially is vitally important. If you think that the will is your last action, it's the last thing that's going to count for you once you're gone. And by not writing a will, and I keep stressing that because most Muslims don't write wills, but not writing a will, you're losing the opportunity not only to fulfill the fund, which is to ensure that everyone gets their rightful share, but to leave something to charity.
Yeah.
And up to 1/3 of your estate on death can be left to charity under Sharia principles. And we usually advise our clients at the end of the meeting or towards the end, do you wish to leave something to charity, even if it's 1 or 2%? If you're leaving your child 100,000, they get 99,000, it makes no difference to them. If you're leaving them 1 million and they get 990,000, they will not notice the difference. But that 1,000 or that 10,000 may be the difference between a good destination and an evil destination, as it were. But that's kind of on a selfish point of view. But on a more selfless point of view, Muslims are suffering all over the world, especially in Gaza, but Pakistan, Syria, all over, even in this country. There's lots of good Muslim causes that could do with being supported.
Yeah.
So why not leave it as one of your final things to do is leave a portion of your wealth to charity to make up for perhaps missed zakat, missed your own obligations, and a sadaqah on top of that. And one thing I would touch upon, which you mentioned earlier in terms of if there's anything we haven't covered, is waqf. So one of the things, I set up a company called iWill 20 odd years ago, A few years ago, my colleague came to me and said, look, we need to do something on waqf.
Yeah,
And we
just
set up-
explain for those that understand what waqf
Yeah.
means and the difference, whether it's sadaqah or it's not classed as a sadaqah.
Yeah, fantastic. So we set up iWaqf, and that's to promote waqf giving. So everyone knows what Sadaqah Jariyah is. It's an ongoing charity.
Yes.
And everyone knows if you give someone, if you feed them once, you fed them for that day. And that's a good thing to do. And lots of charities in the current month are collecting for food parcels in places like Lebanon and the like, and I've been there and done that as well. And it's important and it's necessary because these people rely on that food package. But where's the forward thinking? Because even with Sadaqah Jariyah projects, and the difference between Waqf and Sadaqah Jariyah is Waqf lasts forever.
Yes.
Sadaqah Jariyah will eventually run dry. So for example, if I build a water well, for as long as that water well is used, I'm getting benefit from.
Yes.
However, who's going to maintain that water well? What if it runs dry? And Oxfam did a study recently, and I can't remember the percentage, but it was a significant portion of their water wells are dry because there's no maintenance on it.
Right.
Whereas Waqf is a type of giving which is, I'd call it intelligent finance giving.
Yes.
So it's where you give an asset, but you specify that only the income can be used for charitable purposes.
Yeah.
So in the short term, there's little benefit, but in the long term, the benefit is immense.
Yeah. So the core asset continues to generate income.
Exactly. And I had a client many years ago, a non-Muslim client actually, and he said he wanted to do something to leave behind a legacy because his wife had passed away. He had no children. Cut long story short, he left £150,000, which at that time was used to buy a property for £125,000. And the rental income on that was properties, your field, was £500 per month. Fast forward 12 years, that property is now worth double, well over £250,000. The rental income is £1,200 per month. And each year, 80% of the rental income is used for charitable causes. And that will continue forever.
Yeah.
And this is British Heart Foundation, Cancer Relief. It's not Muslim client. And Waqf is a Muslim concept.
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying of the companion Jabir ibn Abdullah who said that every companion who had the means established their own Waqf.
Yes.
So when you highlight how many people have got wills, it's less than 5%. How many people have their own Waqf? It's probably less than 1%.
Yes.
And iWaqf was made so that people can set up their own Waqf. And the idea is almost like a crowdfunding system. You pull assets together, pull money together. It's invested, but the capital is preserved.
Yes.
And the most famous Waqf is the Waqf of Uthman, radiallahu anh. And he created a Waqf which to this day is generating income. Can you imagine that? Doing an action which 1400 years later is still getting you rewarded for, yes. And you can use your will to leave something in charity and to specify a portion of that perhaps as Waqf, which will continue forever. It is priceless.
Yes. And as you said, it's intelligent charity where you're thinking long-term and sustainability of it. How can that continue to grow? That in this example, the asset value increases in value,
Absolutely.
The income increases, and it will continue pretty much forever to function in that way.
Absolutely. And a portion of the income is used to maintain the asset.
Yes.
So that's why I said on my client case, 80%. And it's accountancy, legals, maintenance, etc. But it's at least 80% per
It's
year.
self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient.
Yes.
And the example I often give to clients is, again, my 4 children. One may, if I give them a property each at age 18, one may retain that property. One may have developed it into several properties. One's probably going to lose it, and one's probably going to lose it in terms of fritter away.
Yes.
One's probably losing it through creditors or spouse. Yes. But if you gave them the income from a property each, then they're guaranteed a minimum level of income forever. And their children, and their children, and their children.
And so you look at some of the largest trust funds in essentially, and wealthy families and the beneficiaries of those families, that's how they're benefiting.
Absolutely. And well, one of my non-Muslim clients, he was quite interesting. He came up to me and he said to me, I feel morally obliged to pay for my grandchildren's education. And he mapped out, and they were aged between 0 and 6 years old.
Right.
What nursery schools, what junior schools, what high schools, what prep schools they were going to.
Yes.
And he mapped out how much he'd need. He only had 4 grandchildren, makes it a bit easier when you only had 4. And he mapped out how much he needed. We set up a couple of trust funds and they funded their education.
Wow.
And this has happened, and these funds still exist.
Yes.
Because it's that forward thinking. He valued education. He's raised his grandchildren on a good education, and now they can do that for their follow-up generation. So it's a concept that, again, Waqf isn't new to the Muslim world, but it's new within our field currently over the last 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So was talking about waqf. No one was talking about waqf. And the reason being is it was just we're a new community. And whereas previously we had waqf structures, they were abused, financially abused, or they were colonialized. That's how the waqfs went down. But now it's ripe for us to start looking to the future.
Yes.
Yes, we must do the immediate charity, but we must also do the long-standing ones. One other point, actually, almost lost my train of thought. Oxford University is waqf. The Masjid Qaranain in Fez in Morocco was set up by a Muslim sister called Fatima as a waqf. Al-Azhar University as a waqf. These are institutions. The Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, the case with regard to turning that back from a cathedral to a masjid, it hinged upon the fact that there's a waqf deed which said this is given as waqf. Because once it's given as waqf, you've given the property to Allah, and therefore there is no taking back.
Yes.
So it's immense, and it should continue forever.
Yes. You've given that asset or that investment in charity. It's given then,
Exactly.
and then it's how it will be managed in the way you want it managed going forward.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of wills, Islamic wills particularly, there's very few people in the country that offer this service. And why do you think that's why do we think that's the case?
Yeah, it's wills generally don't make money. Yeah,
it's not a profitable sector of law.
It's not a profitable sector. Yeah. Why make wills when you can get free wills on the internet or £99 or do-it-yourself wills kit? And why pay a lawyer hundreds of pounds, sometimes thousands of pounds for a will to be prepared? And so generally it's not profitable. A lot of law firms who do wills do it so that they can service their clients and so that they can get property work and family work and provide a service for other.
It's just part of other things, so that it's a one-stop shop for the client.
Exactly, yeah. Whereas we kind of focus in our wills, we focus on the Sharia side. We want to make sure that the Sharia position is correct as much as possible. We can give the right advice. And then we often get the follow-up work when someone passes away. We deal with the probate and estate administration. So the reason why there's not many Islamic wills lawyers is, one, it's not a very profitable field to be in unless you're doing it very well and you get in the volume. Secondly, you need to understand the English law and you need to understand the Sharia. So there's lots of English lawyers out there who can do wills and probate.
Yes.
And there's lots of Mulanas out there who can advise on the distribution, although that in itself is quite complex. But who can combine them both.
Yes.
And that's quite a rare skill set. And alhamdulillah, because we focus on this exclusively, more or less 70-80% of our work is Islamic wills related. We've managed to develop a reputation over the last years and get most of our work from existing clients.
Alhamdulillah. So I've been over the many years, nearly 20 years now, you've been...
I set up iWill Swiss in 2007, and I did my own will in, I think, 2003, 2005.
Yes. So with regards to the Sharia side of the will preparation that you do, is it based on your knowledge and experience, or is there other input to guide what you're doing as well?
Yeah, so 80% of the inheritance rules can be gleaned, I would say, from ayahs 1 to 12 of Surah Nisa, 1 to 14 of Surah Nisa. But that is not enough. You need to know more in terms of what the hadith say, in terms of what to do in unusual circumstances. And over time, it's some of my knowledge. One of my colleagues is an alim, leaned on him, but we've also employed muftis previously to go through all of the scenarios. So anytime we come across a quite awkward or unique scenario, which now alhamdulillah is quite rare, we go back to mufti and say, what's your ruling on this? So it is, and I'm not professing to be a scholar by any means. I can tell you what the distribution is given circumstances. I can tell you the wisdom behind the distribution based on experience. But in terms of the actual Sharia rulings, then we leave that for the muftis.
Yes. And notice you're wearing a Wahid top. So what's the connection between Wahid and iWill?
I thought this would be a subliminal advertising.
Let's make it more obvious.
Yeah, let's make it more obvious. So a few years ago, Wahid knocked on my door and said, look, we're interested in Islamic finance. We provide Islamic finance solutions. We see the will as part of that. And why don't you come on board and work together? And then I realized that the work together was really a why don't we just buy you out option. And to be honest, we've not looked back. They offer Islamic investments, halal based. The leaders in the field got international reach. And alhamdulillah, they've supported us significantly. So we're able to grow the department, introduce tax planning department, and hopefully offer a one-stop shop when it comes to all things Islamic finance related. Inshallah.
And if somebody wants to reach out to you and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Website www.iWillSolicitors.com. Through Wahid, they can come through us as well. And we're generally, I like to think we're generally quite user friendly, and we try to offer initial advice, usually, not always, at no cost, just to kind of get a feel for what's needed and to be able to point people in the right direction. Sometimes we'll turn around and say, look, your circumstances are so straightforward, go online, get a do-it-yourself will. But that's not very often, because usually you're not paying for the few sheets of paper, you're paying for the advice, and everyone's circumstances are quite different. And really, in the grand scheme of things, it's an investment to be made. One is you're benefiting yourself, you're completing your Islamic obligation. You're benefiting your family by giving certainty. You're benefiting the community by having closer family ties with families that are together. You're benefiting charity. So it has a worldwide impact for you writing your will, because when you pass away, you're leaving to charitable projects all over the world. So if you look at it as a selfless thing to do, then even the amount that you spend on it is, personally, I view it as a sadaqah. Not just as a sadaqah for me, but it is just as if you spend on your family. It's an obligation. When you go to Hajj, you don't think, oh, it's going to be just such a cost. Is it worth it? You have to go to Hajj.
Yes.
And this is obviously not at the same length, but it's an obligation that has to be fulfilled.
Yes. So before we finish, what parting thoughts would you share with those that may be watching that are in business, building property businesses, but haven't yet really considered their will?
Inheritance tax is 40%.
So why leave 40% to the government? Why decide how to distribute the money?
Yeah, so to not have planned what happens when you pass away, what I usually say to clients is, if you can guarantee me you're still going to be alive next year, then leave it till next year.
Yes.
But no one's yet been able to give that guarantee. And it's churlish. We all know people have passed away. And there's a serious aspect to it. And so the will covers so many things. It covers your funeral wishes, for example. So I would say get your will in place, because that deals with the end point. Then live your life to get to a successful end point.
Yes.
But we're all going to die, and it's most likely going to take you by surprise.
Yeah.
And therefore, why not get your affairs in order? It's not for personal benefit. You don't have to use iWill Solicitors. There are other providers out there. Speak to somebody, get something in place, but do it correctly. Because if you do it correctly, then it's worth every penny you've paid for it. But if you don't do it correctly, then you have been ripped off.
Yes. Brother Haroon, Jazakallah for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with us as well, and enlightening us with things that are important that often aren't really considered and thought about.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.